I know we're going to go live at 1 o'clock again. And we've been talking about how to survive an MTO facility audit. So that's what we're going to continue on with today. How to survive an MTO facility audit. And we'll start there at in 1 minute and 30 seconds. All right, hopefully you stick around. If you are here, pop a note into the chat. Tell me who you are and where you're from. We'll see if I can't give you a shout out. All right, these videos seem to be getting some traction. Not so much on the live, but a lot of replays on them. And of course, I'm trying to make them of value to you. So if you want, you can leave me a comment or a suggestion or a question. What would you like me to create a video about? What are your questions regarding trucking safety and compliance? So that's what I would suggest that you do. Leave me a comment either here on Facebook or in a few minutes when I post this to YouTube. Leave me a comment. Tell me what it is that you would like to know. All right, and I'd love to make a video for you. 1 o'clock on Mondays is when I go live. I go live on Facebook, and then I later post it to YouTube. So I do go live 1 day a week, try to go live every Monday. Sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it works out. I am here live most days, Mondays at 1. And there we go. The timer is up. And of course, we are now live. And thanks for joining. All right, and thanks for watching. As I said, live on Mondays at 1 on Facebook, and then shortly thereafter we post to YouTube. What would you like to see in future videos? What question do you have regarding trucking safety and compliance that I might be able to answer for you? All right, so as I said to you last week, I thought I would make this much more structured. I'd like to pick one article out for the news and start it off with just one item or one comment about something in the news, and then move into something substantial. And right now we are talking about CVOR and how to survive an MTO audit. So if you're from Ontario, or even if you're from anywhere else in Canada or in the United States, much of what I'm saying about how to survive an MTO audit also applies right across all jurisdictions. So first, let me go to, and I know I've screwed this up already. I just realized. Let me go to, there we go. All right, so the news article this week that I thought was kind of interesting was this one. Tractor trailer collision spills beer right across an Ontario highway. And it was quite a mess. If I can hit play on that, you will see that these fellows, well, of course we got to have an ad here. But what can I say? I didn't know we were going to have an ad. All right, so 3 transport trucks, and this one spilt beer right across the highway. So enough of that. I just wanted you to know about it. It was kind of interesting, and of course that's not the best way to go. Let me see if I can't do the thing now, and of course the computer is going to give me a hard time. It always happens when we're on live, of course. You got to have a hard time. You can't have things go smooth. And yes, I use Carrier's Edge. And there. It's going to let me hone in on it. Yes. And now I can get to go to my presentation software. Yes, I can. And there we go. Mondays, 1 p.m., the secrets of a safety dog. I shouldn't be on camera for this part, but hey, I screw up. And every Monday at 1, we go live. Today is not November the 16th. I forgot to change. I've been working very hard. Today's the 23rd. I've been working really hard on my presentation for this truck driver virtual meeting. That's what I'm trying to do today. The presentation, I've already recorded Carrie's, and I'm recording mine today. So to avoid technical difficulties for this virtual truck driver meeting, that is this Friday, Black Friday, it is this Friday, and you still do have time to register if you would like. Call Kim Seitzma-Hill at KRTS. She's got all the info. She can get you registered. And stuff, but I'm working really hard on the presentation, trying to get it recorded today. We've decided to record the presentations to avoid as many of the technical difficulties as might beset us. Both Carrie and I are going to be attending live, and we will be able to answer your questions live. One of the other frequently asked questions about this virtual truck driver meeting is proof of attendance. And so we have created a quiz that will help prove that your drivers attended. So if you're worried about that, we've got you covered. We're supplying a quiz. You just got to get your drivers to complete it, and that will go a long way to proving that they were in attendance. And the other question that we have been getting frequently is, what if the driver can't attend either the Friday or the Saturday? Well, again, we got you covered there too, because we're going to keep the recording up until December the 31st. Keep it up until December the 31st so that if your drivers can't attend on Friday or Saturday, they will have an opportunity between now and December the 31st to watch the replay and answer the quiz. So that's it for that. Did the news. We are how to prepare for a CVOR audit. And this week, next week, we're going to be talking about the third component. We already talked about maintenance last week, all right? This week, we're going to be talking about QR&R, and if you don't know what that is, stick around because that is important. QR&R. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about the hours of service next week. So with God willing, I will be back next Monday, and we'll talk about the hours of service. So QR&R. What does that stand for? QR&R. Qualifications, records, and reporting. So qualifications, records, and reporting. And if anybody's out there watching, leave me a note in the chat there. Leave a comment and I'll give you a shout out. But qualifications, records, and reporting. This is the secret. So in order to successfully get through through an MTO audit, you need to have a valid copy of the driver's license in the driver file. So the first thing, valid copy of the driver's license in the driver file. That should be pretty simple, but you'd be surprised perhaps, or perhaps you wouldn't be, how often I look in a driver file and I find an expired driver's license. Well, that won't meet the very first qualification here. So the MTO officer is looking for your qualified driver. They're trying to make sure the driver is qualified. And the first thing is that he's got or she has got a valid driver's license, and you must have that in file. So, hey, Joanne Rohats, how are you? You're not a truck driver. You know, and she says my hair is nice color, but you know, hey, I'm trying to grow the beard I'm going to pretend I'm Santa Claus. So you need to have a valid driver's license, and then anytime that the driver has been proven to be on the road, he must have a proper class of license. So again, the auditor is going to be looking for commercial vehicle inspection reports, CVIRs. This would place the driver at a scale at the time of the inspection. And then he's going to compare, or she will compare that to your driver file to make sure the driver has the right class of license for the vehicle being operated at the scale. So if it's a tractor trailer, obviously, in Ontario, they would need an AZ with a Z endorsement. So the proper class. So far we've got a valid driver's license and the proper class of driver's license. Dangerous goods certificate, if a dangerous goods certificate is required. So if you're hauling hazmat or dangerous goods as we call it in Canada, you must have a dangerous goods certificate, not expired, because they do expire every 3 years. You need to have a good one. Abstract obtained within the last 12 months. So this is an MTO requirement. You must have a driver's abstract obtained at least in the last 12 months, and it could be either the CVOR or the 3-year driver abstract. For insurance purposes, the insurance company always wants to see the 3-year abstract. I would recommend to you that you want to pull one of these abstracts every 90 days. And that's so that if your driver gets caught without a license, for instance, his license was suspended because they didn't pay some tickets, that you can prove that within the last 100 days, you knew that he had or she had the proper class of license, that the driver had the proper class of license, and you may avoid your truck being impounded at that time. All right, so an abstract within the last 12 months and all convictions that the drivers had within the last 24 months. So all convictions, you need to know about them, and you may want to document what actions you've taken, because we'll hit that in just a second. You also need to know about all of the collisions that driver has had. So if you have different things here now, you've got all convictions in the last 24 months, but all collisions, and they're talking about also what has happened in a passenger vehicle. So it's not just what's happening in the truck. You need to know about all collisions that the driver has had in a passenger vehicle, as well as all of their tickets or all of their convictions in the passenger vehicle, and of course in the trucks. And that is because your insurance provider may deem them uninsurable with certain tickets. So you need to know about it all. So all collisions that happened in a truck and and I said that wrong. All collisions that have happened in a commercial motor vehicle and all tickets in both personal and a truck is the right way to say that. So all tickets, personal and in a truck, and all collisions. And I would urge the drivers to tell the employer about all collisions, but all collisions that happen in a commercial truck must be documented by the employer or the trucking company. And then the action taken by the carrier. So if you've decided to retrain the driver, I would issue a letter for all convictions and for all the collisions that we know about. I would issue a letter to the driver, and then any training, of course, that I gave the driver to help, I would document that. If it was just a letter of warning, document the letter of warning, of course, and put that into the driver file. And that would be it. So that's what you need in a driver file to pass an audit. So just to do that really quickly, again, we've got here, so you got to have for the QR&R, you've got to have a valid driver's license, the proper class of license, your dangerous goods certificate, an abstract within 12 months, know about all convictions, personal and in commercial vehicles, and about all collisions in commercial vehicles. And then document the action that you take. So that's it for this week. Next week, we will talk about hours of service. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hi, Joanne. Goodbye, Joanne. Talk to you later. Bye.